I watched my parents' faces drain of colour as I stepped off the stage with my hard-earned MBA. My sister Emma looked equally shocked, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. None of them had expected this moment. Me graduating from Wharton, with highest honours, and certainly not the announcement that followed. And now I'd like to recognise Morgan Taylor, this year's recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship, who has also secured a position at Goldman Sachs. The same parents who had told me, "We just can't afford your education," while paying every penny for my sister's 4 years at NYU, were now staring at the stranger their incapable daughter had become. But their shock was nothing compared to what I had planned for the celebration dinner. If you're watching this right now, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey of family betrayal and long-awaited justice. I still remember trembling as I walked across that stage, knowing the truth was finally going to come out. If you've ever been the family scapegoat while watching someone else be the golden child, you know exactly how I felt. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you want more stories about family karma finally coming full circle. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I was 12 years old when my sister Emma was born. I remember the excitement I felt, helping my mom Diana decorate the nursery with butterflies and flowers, imagining all the things I would teach my little sister. My father Richard beamed with pride, showing off photos of his little princess to everyone at his accounting firm. Those early years seemed normal enough. Our family lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a nice Connecticut suburb. Dad worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Hartford, while Mum sold real estate part-time. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough for annual family vacations to Florida, new clothes for school each year, and the occasional splurge on things that mattered. The first hint that something wasn't quite right came around my 14th birthday. I'd asked for a laptop for school, nothing fancy, just something for writing papers and research. My parents hesitated, telling me they needed to think about the expense. 2 weeks later, they came home with a beautiful handcrafted dollhouse for 2-year-old Emma, who was too young to even appreciate it. When I pointed this out, my mother patted my shoulder and said, "You're so mature for your age, Morgan. Emma needs these little joys more than you do." This pattern continued throughout my high school years. While I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, served as class president for 3 years straight, and captained the debate team to state championships, my accomplishments were met with perfunctory praise. "That's nice, honey," or "We expected nothing." "Less" was all I'd get before the conversation shifted to Emma's finger painting, or how adorable she looked at her dance recital. When I turned 16, I asked about getting a car like many of my friends were. My parents explained that I would need to work for it. I took a job at the local library, saving every penny for 10 months to buy a used Honda Civic that constantly broke down. 2 years later, on Emma's 16th birthday, my parents surprised her with a brand new Volkswagen Beetle, complete with custom seat covers and a premium sound system. "Emma isn't as responsible as you," my father explained when I couldn't hide my hurt. "She needs the reliability of a new car for safety reasons." By my senior year of high school, the disparity had become impossible to ignore. I was applying to colleges, sweeping academic awards, and working 20 hours a week, while Emma struggled to maintain a C average. Yet every minor accomplishment of hers was celebrated with dinner out or special gifts, while my achievements were simply expected. "You're so independent, Morgan," became my mother's constant refrain, as if my competence justified their neglect. "Emma needs more encouragement." I channeled my frustration into excellence, believing that if I just achieved enough, they would finally see me. I applied to 12 prestigious universities, writing scholarship essays late into the night after finishing my homework and work shifts. When acceptance letters started arriving, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, I thought finally, they would be proud. Instead, I walked into the most devastating conversation of my young life. "Honey," my father said one evening, sitting me down at our kitchen table, "we need to talk about these college acceptances." I smiled, waiting for the praise, the celebration, maybe even an admission that they had misjudged me all these years. "We're very proud," my mother began, not quite meeting my eyes. But we need to be practical about finances. My smile faltered. What do you mean? We just don't have college. Funds set aside for you, my father said, shuffling papers in front of him. These Ivy League schools, even with partial scholarships, they're just not in our budget. I stared at them, uncomprehending. My whole life had been building toward this moment. Every late night studying, every weekend sacrificed, every exhausting hour at my part-time job, all with the promise that education was the one thing they would always support. But I struggled to find words. What about the college fund Grandpa talked about? He told me years ago he'd contributed to it. My parents exchanged a quick glance that I couldn't interpret at the time. That money had to be reallocated, my father said firmly. The kitchen renovation last year, some investments that didn't pan out. We're sorry, Morgan, but you'll need to consider state schools and more scholarships. I nodded numbly, retreating to my room where I cried silently into my pillow. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way forward, with or without their support. Little did I know that this wasn't just about financial limitations. It was the first major betrayal in a pattern that would take me years to fully uncover. The rejection from my parents hit me like a physical blow. I had been accepted to my dream schools. Princeton was my top choice, offering a partial scholarship that would cover about 40% of the costs. I had naively assumed my parents would help with the rest, or at least co-sign loans. After all, they had always emphasized the importance of education. Instead, I found myself enrolling at Connecticut State University, the only option I could afford with my savings and the academic scholarship I'd earned. I took the maximum course load each semester and worked 30 hours a week across 2 jobs, shelving books at the university library during days and waiting tables at Applebee's on evenings and weekends. My typical day started at 5 in the morning with 2 hours of studying before my first class at 8. I'd attend lectures until 2, work at the library until 6, then rush to Applebee's for the dinner shift until midnight. After closing, I'd squeeze in another hour of homework before collapsing into bed, only to start again 5 hours later. Weekends meant double shifts at the restaurant and marathon study sessions in between. While other students were attending football games, joining clubs, or simply enjoying the college experience, I was calculating tips and highlighting textbooks during my breaks. I rarely went home during those first 3 years of college, claiming work commitments when holiday gatherings came around. The truth was I couldn't bear to see my parents, to be reminded of their betrayal. But during my junior year, Thanksgiving coincided with my manager giving me unexpected time off, and I reluctantly made the drive home. Nothing could have prepared me for what I found. Emma was in her senior year of high school, applying to colleges. Herself. Over turkey and stuffing, she casually mentioned her top choice, New York University, an expensive private school in one of the most costly cities in America. "We've already put the deposit down," my mother announced proudly. "Emma's going to have an apartment in Manhattan. We want her to have the full college experience." I nearly choked on my cranberry sauce. "How are you affording that?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. "We've made some financial arrangements, took out a second mortgage on the house." "A second mortgage?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "For NYU? When you couldn't help me with Princeton?" "It's different with Emma," my mother said, her tone suddenly defensive. "She's not as academically gifted as you. She needs the prestigious degree more than you did." "You'll be fine wherever you go," my father added with a dismissive wave. "Emma needs every advantage she can get." I excused myself from the table and locked myself in my childhood bathroom, pressing my fist against my mouth to keep from screaming. Through the door, I could hear the conversation continuing as if nothing had happened. My parents asking Emma about which Manhattan neighborhoods she preferred, discussing furniture for her apartment, planning shopping trips for her college wardrobe. That night, I lay awake in my old bedroom, surrounded by the debate trophies and academic medals my parents had never really valued. I thought about Emma's C+ average and how she'd never held a job. I thought about my parents taking out a second mortgage, risking their home, for her education when they couldn't spare a dime for mine. Something didn't add up. My parents weren't struggling financially, not with their careers, our comfortable home, and their ability to take lavish vacations. And what about the college fund my grandfather had mentioned years ago? As the night deepened, so did my resolve. I wasn't just going to accept their explanations anymore. I was going to find out the truth about our family finances, about why I had been treated as an afterthought while Emma received everything. The next morning, I changed my spring semester schedule, adding accounting and finance classes to my English major. If I was going to understand what was really happening with my family's money, I needed to learn to speak their language. I didn't know it then, but this decision would not only reveal the truth I sought, it would completely change the course of my life. My new finance and accounting classes opened up a world I never knew I had an aptitude for. Numbers that might have confused others made perfect sense to me, and I found myself excelling in these courses even more than my English literature classes. By the end of that spring semester, I had changed my major to business with a concentration in finance, a decision that raised no eyebrows at home since my parents rarely asked about my studies. During spring break, instead of heading to the beach like other students, I went home with a mission. While my parents were at work, I systematically went through their home office, taking photos of any financial documents I could find. I discovered old tax returns, investment statements, mortgage papers and bank records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew something wasn't right. Among a stack of old correspondence in my father's filing cabinet, I found several letters from my grandfather dating back to my childhood. One in particular caught my eye, written when I was 8 years old, mentioning a specific trust fund he had established for my education. The amount mentioned was substantial, $75,000, which by the time I reached college age should have grown significantly. For Morgan's bright future, my grandfather had written. This money is specifically for her education and cannot be used for any other purpose. My hands trembled as I read those words. There had been money set aside for me, money that my parents claimed didn't exist or had been reallocated. This wasn't just favoritism, this was theft. Over. The next year I became a financial detective in my own family. I scheduled visits home around times when I knew my parents would be busy, using these opportunities to gather more evidence. I borrowed statements from their desks, photographed documents, and slowly pieced together the truth. The bombshell came during Christmas break of my senior year. In a locked drawer in my father's desk, the key to which he kept hidden in the same spot since I was a child, I found documents relating to an inheritance from my maternal grandmother who had passed away when I was 14. She had left a significant sum specifically designated for my education, over $100,000 that I had never known about. Further digging revealed multiple accounts, investment portfolios, and assets that contradicted everything. My parents had told me about their financial situation. They weren't struggling to make ends meet. They were upper middle class with substantial savings and investments. The financial arrangements they claimed couldn't be made for my education had absolutely been possible. Most damning of all were the detailed records of expenses for Emma, her Manhattan apartment lease showing $2,400 monthly rent, credit card statements revealing shopping sprees at designer stores, receipts for spring break, trips to Cancun and Paris, all funded directly by my parents. In 1 year, they had spent more on Emma's college experience than my entire 4-year education had cost. This wasn't about financial necessity. My parents had chosen to invest everything in Emma while leaving me to fend for myself. I needed to confirm what I suspected, so I arranged lunch with my grandfather during that same break. We met at his favourite diner, and after some small talk, I carefully broached the subject. "Grandpa, I found some old letters where you mentioned setting up a college fund for me." His eyebrows shot up, but he didn't seem surprised by the question. "Yes, I did. Set aside $75,000 when you were little. Your grandmother added to it before she passed too. Did you know I'm working 2 jobs to pay for state college while Mum and Dad took out a second mortgage for Emma to go to NYU?" His face darkened. Morgan, I've had my suspicions about how your parents handle finances between you girls, but it's not my place to interfere in how they raise their children. Even if they misused money that was specifically designated for me? I pressed. He sighed heavily. I should have set up a formal trust that they couldn't access until you were in college. That's my mistake. But Morgan, he reached across the table to take my hand. Don't let this embitter you. Family is still family. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Family is still family, but my family had been lying to me for years, taking what was meant for me and giving it to my sister. After graduating with my business degree from Connecticut State, I made a strategic decision. Instead of immediately pursuing a higher-paying job, I transferred to a community college to take additional finance courses while working even more hours to save money. To my parents, this looked like I was floundering, unable to launch a successful career, exactly the narrative they had always believed about me compared to Emma's potential. In reality, I was laying the groundwork for something much bigger. The quiet, accommodating daughter they thought they knew was gone. In her place was a woman with a plan and the financial knowledge to execute it. After discovering the extent of my parents' deception, I knew I needed more than just righteous anger. I needed a strategy. Community college became my cover while I worked to rebuild my future from the ground up. My approach was simple but required immense discipline. Excel academically, build financial independence, and let no one in my family know what I was really doing. In my advanced finance course, I caught the attention of Professor Jenkins, a former Wall Street executive who had retired to teach. After I aced his notoriously difficult midterm exam, he asked me to stay after class. "You have a natural talent for this," he said, studying me with keen eyes. "But you're at community college after already earning a bachelor's degree. What's your story, Morgan?" Something about his direct approach broke through my carefully constructed walls. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. The favoritism, the stolen education funds, my determination to succeed despite it all. Instead of offering sympathy, he offered opportunity. I still have connections at several top business schools. With your grades and obvious aptitude, you could aim much higher than this. Under Professor Jenkins' mentorship, I began secretly applying to prestigious MBA programs. During the day, I worked at a local investment firm where I quickly impressed the senior management with my analytical skills. Evenings were spent crafting applications, writing essays, and studying for the GMAT. All the while, I maintained the facade at family gatherings. I became the agreeable, unambitious daughter they expected me to be. "Community college is really working out for me," I would say with a carefully crafted smile. "It's more my speed anyway." My mother would nod knowingly. "Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers. There's no shame in finding your comfort level." These comments stung, but I used the pain to fuel my determination. Every dismissive remark, every comparison to Emma became another brick in the foundation I was building. Speaking of Emma, she graduated from NYU with average grades and predictably no job prospects. My parents funded her apartment in Manhattan while she found herself through a series of short-lived enthusiasms, first a food blog that lasted 3 weeks, then an attempt at fashion journalism that produced 2 articles, followed by an interest in becoming a yoga instructor that ended after 1 class. "Emma just needs time to find her passion," my mother explained during a rare family dinner I attended. "Not everyone knows their path right away." I nodded, hiding my bitterness behind a sip of wine. The double standard was glaring. I had always been expected to be self-sufficient, while Emma was given endless resources and patience to discover herself. Then came the news that my parents had taken out another loan, this time against their retirement accounts, to fund Emma's fashion startup. This venture consisted mainly of an expensive camera, a MacBook Pro, and a website that never launched. While this was happening, I received the letter that would change everything. Acceptance to Wharton's MBA program with a full scholarship based on academic merit and financial need. Professor Jenkins had written a recommendation so glowing it had caught the attention of the Anderson family, major donors to the business school, who selected one student annually for their prestigious scholarship. When the Andersons invited me to dinner to discuss the scholarship, I was struck by how they treated me, with respect, interest, and genuine belief in my potential. Mrs. Anderson, a formidable investment banker herself, spent 2 hours discussing market trends with me, never once speaking down or assuming I couldn't follow complex concepts. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said warmly, "determined to succeed no matter what obstacles are placed in your way." For the first time, I felt truly seen for who I was and what I could accomplish. The contrast between the Andersons' treatment and my own family's was stark and painful. I accepted the scholarship and made arrangements to begin my MBA program, telling no one in my family where I was really going. To them, I was taking courses. In Philadelphia, while working remotely, technically true but deliberately vague. If you've ever had to hide your true potential from the people who should have been your biggest supporters, you know how bittersweet this victory felt. I was moving toward an amazing future, but I couldn't share my excitement with my family. Drop a comment if you've ever had to downplay your success around people who couldn't handle seeing you shine. Sometimes the loneliest part of proving people wrong is doing it in silence, but trust me, the moment they finally see who you've become is worth every second of waiting. My 2 years at Wharton were transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. I arrived as a determined but wounded young woman with something to prove, and I emerged as a confident professional with a clear vision for my future. From the moment I stepped onto campus, I approached every class, networking event and project as an opportunity to reinvent myself. I threw myself into my studies with singular focus, earning the highest marks in core classes like advanced financial management and strategic decision-making. Professors began to take notice, often asking me to contribute insights during discussions or lead group projects. Where I had once hidden my intelligence to avoid my parents' indifference, I now embraced it fully. The Andersons didn't just provide financial support, they became the mentors my parents never were. George Anderson invited me to shadow him at his investment firm during spring break, introducing me to partners and clients as the future of finance. His wife Caroline regularly sent books she thought would interest me, with thoughtful notes, highlighting passages she found particularly relevant to my goals. "You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss," George told me after I identified an overlooked opportunity in one of their portfolio companies. "That intuition, combined with your analytical skills, will take you far." When the time came, for summer internships after my first year, the Andersons connected me with Goldman Sachs. The interview process was grueling, 6 rounds with increasingly senior executives, each one probing my knowledge, judgment, and ability to think under pressure. I prepared meticulously, spending weeks researching the firm and practicing responses to potential questions. My hard work paid off. I not only secured the internship, but was singled out for the firm's accelerated leadership track, typically reserved for graduates of Harvard and Yale, with family connections to the industry. By the end of the summer, I had received a formal job offer for after graduation, with a starting salary and bonus package that indeed exceeded my parents' combined annual income. Throughout this period, my communication with my family remained minimal and superficial. Monthly phone calls with my mother consisted mainly of updates about Emma's latest ventures, a podcast that recorded 3 episodes, a jewellery design business that produced 2 necklaces, a brief stint as a personal assistant to a minor celebrity that ended when she repeatedly showed up late. "Emma's just exploring," my mother would say, oblivious to the irony. "Not everyone can be satisfied with a conventional path like yours." If she only knew. During holiday visits, I played my part perfectly, the dutiful but unremarkable daughter who had settled for less. I spoke vaguely about my courses and my job, never revealing the prestigious names attached to either. When pressed about my future plans, I would shrug and say I was still figuring things out, a phrase that had earned Emma endless support, but got me dismissive nods. "At least you're realistic about your capabilities," my father once commented, after I deliberately understated a professional accomplishment. These moments were harder than I expected. Despite knowing the truth, despite my growing success, their casual dismissal still had the power to wound me. There were nights in my Philadelphia apartment when I questioned my entire plan. Was I being petty, unnecessarily secretive? Would it be better to simply tell them about Wharton, about Goldman Sachs, about the Andersons? But then I would remember the documents I'd found, the inheritance that had been kept from me, the second mortgage for Emma's education that they'd claimed they couldn't afford for mine. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. It was about justice, about finally being seen for who I truly was. As graduation approached, I debated whether to invite my family at all. The Andersons would be there, as would Professor Jenkins and several colleagues from Goldman Sachs who had become friends. Did I want my parents and Emma to witness this moment? Finally, I decided they should be there. Not for my sake, but for theirs. They needed to see the daughter they had underestimated. They needed to face the consequences of their choices. I sent a casual email 3 weeks before the ceremony. I'm finishing up my program in Philadelphia next month. There's a small graduation ceremony if you want to come. No pressure. My mother replied almost immediately. Of course we'll be there, honey. Emma has been wanting to visit Philadelphia anyway. Send us the details. I provided the bare minimum. Information, date, time, location. I didn't mention Wharton. I didn't mention honours. I certainly didn't mention that I would be singled out during the ceremony as the Anderson Scholar, or that I had already secured a position that most business students would kill for. As I tried on my graduation gown in my apartment the week C. Before the ceremony, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the exhausted, heartbroken girl who had once cried over her parents' betrayal. I had transformed not just my circumstances, but myself. The Andersons had arranged for professional photographs to be taken after the ceremony, followed by a celebration dinner at Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant. My family didn't know about either. They didn't know a lot of things, yet, but they would. Soon, very soon, they would know everything. May 15th dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for graduation. I woke early, too keyed up to sleep, and spent an hour going through my carefully prepared notes for the day. Every detail mattered, from the precisely timed arrival of each guest to the seating arrangement at dinner. Today, years of planning would finally come to fruition. The graduation ceremony was held in Wharton's historic courtyard, with rows of chairs arranged beneath flowering trees. I spotted my family as they arrived. My father in his standard navy suit, my mother in a floral dress she'd worn to countless functions, and Emma trailing behind them, already looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. They took seats, near the back, not bothering to check the reserved section where name cards had been placed for them. The Andersons arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed and carrying a gift bag. My grandfather followed, moving slowly with his cane but beaming with pride. They found their reserved seats in the front row exactly as planned. As the ceremony began, I sat with my fellow graduates, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The dean spoke about achievement and potential, about the select few who had distinguished themselves during their time at Wharton. And then, I'd like to recognise this year's recipient of the Anderson Family Scholarship for Outstanding Achievement in Finance. This student maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while completing 2 independent research projects, serving as a teaching assistant for 3 graduate courses, and securing one of only 2 positions offered by Goldman Sachs in their executive investment division. Please join me in congratulating Morgan Taylor. The applause was enthusiastic as I walked across the stage. I kept my eyes fixed on my parents, watching as confusion gave way to shock on their faces. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision. Emma's phone dropped into her lap, forgotten. The dean continued. Morgan has also been selected as this year's student speaker, an honour reserved for the graduate who best exemplifies the values and excellence of the Wharton School of Business. This was not part of my plan. The student speaker had fallen ill the day before, and the dean had asked me to step in just hours earlier. I had hastily prepared remarks, seeing it as an opportunity too perfect to pass up. As I stepped to the podium, I looked directly at my family for The first time. Thank you, Dean Williams. I'm honoured to represent the Wharton MBA class of 2023 today. I paused, letting the name of the prestigious business school hang in the air. My journey here wasn't traditional. I didn't come from wealth or connections. In fact, for many years, I was told explicitly and implicitly that I wasn't capable of this level of achievement. I saw my mother shift uncomfortably in her seat. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through undergraduate education. I studied late into the night after exhausting. Shifts. I saved every penny while watching others receive opportunities I could only dream of. Another pause, including members of my own family. My father's face had gone from pale to crimson. But today isn't about resentment. It's about resilience. It's about proving that your origin story doesn't define your ending. It's about showing that sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who see you the least, and that their failure to see your potential says more about them than it ever could about you. The audience applauded, unaware of the private drama unfolding within my words. I finished with standard congratulations to my fellow graduates and stepped down from the podium, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice having remained steady throughout. After the ceremony, as graduates and families mingled in the courtyard, my parents approached me with expressions I couldn't quite read, somewhere between anger, confusion, and an attempt at pride. "Wharton?" my father said, his voice low. "You've been at Wharton this whole time. How could you afford this?" Before I could answer, the Andersons appeared at my side. "Morgan, darling, congratulations." Caroline embraced me warmly while George shook my hand. "We couldn't be prouder," George said, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. 2 years of absolute excellence. My mother's smile was brittle. "And you are?" "George and Caroline Anderson," I said smoothly. "The donors of my full scholarship and my mentors, they're joining us for dinner tonight." "Dinner?" My mother blinked. "We were just going to take you to the Olive Garden to celebrate." I smiled, enjoying the moment perhaps more than I should have. "I've made reservations at La Maison, 7 o'clock. The Andersons and Grandpa will be joining us." At the mention of my grandfather, my parents' expressions changed again. He had been watching our exchange from a few feet away and now approached, hugging me tightly. "I always knew you had greatness in you," he said, loud enough for my parents to hear. Emma, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "So you've been lying to us? Pretending to be at community college while you were actually here?" Her tone was accusatory, but I detected something else beneath it. Hurt, perhaps, or fear. "I never lied," I replied calmly. "I said I was taking courses in Philadelphia. I was. I just didn't specify which institution or what degree." "But why wouldn't you tell us?" my mother demanded, her voice rising slightly. "We're your family." I met her gaze steadily. "We can discuss that at dinner. I think you'll find I had my reasons." The reception continued awkwardly, with my parents attempting to claim credit for my success to anyone who would listen. "We always encouraged her independence," my father told one of my professors. "Made her stand on her own 2 feet." I let these comments slide, knowing that dinner would bring all the confrontation I needed. As we prepared to leave the reception, I saw Emma frantically texting, her thumbs flying over her phone screen. I didn't need to see the messages to know. She was in panic mode, perhaps sensing that the family dynamic she had benefited from for so long was about to be upended. The stage was set. In just a few hours, at a table at Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant, surrounded by witnesses, they couldn't dismiss or intimidate. My parents would finally face the truth of what they had done, and the daughter they had underestimated. La Maison occupied the top floor of Philadelphia's tallest building, offering panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white-clothed tables and elegant place settings. It was exactly the type of establishment my parents would find intimidating, and that was precisely why I had chosen it. The maitre d' led us to a private dining area I had reserved months in advance. Place cards arranged by me ensured my parents were seated, directly across from the Andersons, with my grandfather at one end of the table and me at the other. Emma was placed between our father and George Anderson, looking increasingly uncomfortable as she realised she couldn't escape whatever was coming. My mother attempted small talk as the first course arrived, a delicate seafood amuse-bouche that she eyed with suspicion. "So, Morgan has always been our independent one," she said to Caroline Anderson. "We knew she'd find her way eventually." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Independent indeed. Morgan tells me she worked 2 jobs throughout undergraduate school while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. That's more than finding her way. That's extraordinary determination." My father jumped in. "We always taught her the value of hard work." "Among other lessons," I said quietly, taking a sip of water. The conversation continued in this vein through the appetizer course, my parents attempting to rewrite history, the Andersons subtly challenging their narrative, and me biding my time. Emma remained uncharacteristically silent, her eyes darting between speakers like she was watching a tennis match. As the main course was served, filet mignon for most of us, though Emma had requested a special vegetarian option, I decided the moment had arrived. I gently tapped my knife against my water glass, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To education, to opportunity, and to truth." Everyone raised their glasses somewhat uncertainly. "Speaking of truth," I continued, setting my glass down, "I think it's time we talk about how I actually got here." The table fell silent. My mother's smile froze on her face. "Mum, Dad, you've spent the evening implying that you supported my educational journey, that you somehow contributed to my success at Wharton. That's not just revisionist history, it's a complete fabrication." My father's face darkened. "Morgan, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, it's exactly the time and place," I interrupted, reaching into the leather portfolio I had placed beside my chair. "I've waited years for this conversation, and I've chosen to have it here now with witnesses who won't allow you to gaslight me as you've done my entire life." I removed a folder containing copies of all the documents I had gathered over the years. "Let's start with this." I slid a paper across the table toward my parents. "A letter from Grandpa dated 15 years ago, detailing the $75,000 he contributed to my college fund. Money you told me didn't exist when I was accepted to Princeton." My grandfather nodded solemnly. "I set that aside, specifically for Morgan's education. It should have been more than enough for undergraduate tuition at the time." My mother's face had gone pale. "We had to use that money for family expenses. Times were tough." "Were they?" I pushed another document toward them. "This is your financial statement from that same year. You had over $300,000 in investments and savings. You took a 2-week vacation to Hawaii that cost $15,000. Tough times seems like an exaggeration." I turned to Emma, whose wide eyes revealed she hadn't known any of this. "I don't blame you for this, Emma. You were a child when these decisions were made. But you should know that our parents took out a second mortgage on their house to send you to NYU and pay for your Manhattan apartment, while telling me they couldn't afford to help me with college at all." Emma looked at our parents in confusion. "Is that true?" My father tried to regain control of the situation. "Morgan, you're taking things out of context. Financial decisions are complicated." "Then let me simplify things," I said, removing another document. "This is Grandmother's will, leaving $100,000 specifically for my education. Money I never saw a penny of. Where did I'd go?" The silence that followed was deafening. "It went to the lake house," my grandfather said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. "They used Morgan's inheritance to buy the vacation property in Vermont." My mother gasped. "Dad, that's not—" "It's exactly what happened," he cut her off. "I've kept quiet for years because I thought it wasn't my place to interfere. But I won't sit here and watch you lie to her face about money that was legally and morally hers." Throughout dinner, I methodically presented each piece of evidence as a new course was served. Bank statements showing transfers from my designated accounts to general family funds. Credit card statements revealing Emma's shopping sprees in Manhattan while I worked double shifts to afford textbooks, tax returns demonstrating our family's comfortable financial position despite their claims of hardship. The Andersons watched this unfold with quiet sympathy, occasionally asking clarifying questions that prevented my parents from dismissing or derailing the conversation. Their presence was crucial, as wealthy, respected figures in the financial world. They couldn't be intimidated or fooled by my parents' excuses. "Let me be clear," I said as dessert was served. "I'm not doing this for money. I don't need or want anything from you now. My education is complete, paid for by scholarships I earned and people who actually believed in me. My career is launched. I start at Goldman Sachs next month with a compensation package that frankly dwarfs anything you could offer me." "Then why all this?" my father demanded, gesturing at the documents spread across the table. "Why ambush us like this if not for money?" "For accountability," I said simply. "For acknowledgement of what you did. You diverted funds specifically, designated for my education to other purposes. You lied to me about family finances. You made me work myself to exhaustion while giving Emma everything on a silver platter. I want you to admit what you did and why you did it." My mother, who had been growing increasingly distressed, suddenly burst into tears. "You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Emma needed the support more. She's always been fragile, less confident." "And whose fault is that?" I asked quietly. "You created that dynamic. You made me self-sufficient because you gave me no choice, and you made Emma dependent because you never expected anything from her." Emma, who had been silent for most of the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. "Did you really take out a second mortgage for my NYU tuition?" she asked our parents. My father nodded reluctantly. "And Morgan really worked 2 jobs while going to school full-time." Her voice was small. 30 to 40 hours a week for 4 years, I confirmed. Emma looked at me, then at our parents. That's not fair. Why would you do that? Why would you treat us so differently?" Her question hung in the air, the one I had been asking myself for years. It was the heart of everything, not just the financial disparity, but the emotional one. Why had they decided, from the time we were children, that I deserved less love, less support, less everything? My father, cornered and defensive, finally snapped. Because Morgan was always a reminder of our limitations, always so perfect, so capable, making us feel inadequate as parents. Emma needed us. Morgan never seemed to. The raw honesty of his outburst silenced the table. In his anger, he had revealed a truth I hadn't fully understood until that moment. My competence had threatened them. My independence hadn't been appreciated. It had been punished. "I needed you," I said softly, feeling unexpected tears form. "I just learned not to show it because you never responded when I did." The dinner ended shortly after that. The Andersons tactfully suggested it was getting late, and my grandfather asked to be taken back to his hotel. As the party broke up, Emma lingered behind, waiting until our parents had moved toward the elevator. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "about any of this. I swear, Morgan." I believed her. Emma had been raised in a bubble of privilege our parents created, never questioning why things came so easily to her. "I know," I replied. "This isn't about you, Emma. It's about them and the choices they made." She nodded, then hesitated before asking, Will you teach me? How to be independent, I mean, like you." It was the first time in our adult lives that Emma had asked for my help rather than my parents. Something had shifted tonight, not just between me and our parents, but between us sisters as well. "Yes," I said after a moment. "I'd like that." As I watched her hurry to catch up with our parents at the elevator, I felt an unexpected lightness. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned in one sense. I had presented my evidence, forced acknowledgements, created the exact scene of reckoning I had envisioned for years. But something else had happened too, something I hadn't anticipated. In exposing the truth, I had created an opening, not for reconciliation perhaps, but for something new to emerge from the ruins of the family relationships I had known. The days following the dinner were filled with a storm of texts, calls and voicemails from my parents, ranging from defensive anger to tearful apologies. I let most go to voicemail, needing time to process what had happened and what I wanted to happen next. Emma, surprisingly, reached out in a different way. The morning after the dinner, she sent a single text. "Can we talk? Just us." We met at a quiet cafe near my apartment 2 days later. Emma arrived looking different than I was used to seeing her, hair pulled back simply, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a plain sweater rather than her usual designer outfits. "I've been thinking about everything you said," she began after we'd gotten our coffees. "About how Mom and Dad treated us differently. I knew they were easier on me, but I had no idea about the money, about your inheritance, about you working while I was spending their money on clothes and trips." I nodded, letting her continue. "The thing is, Morgan, being the favourite wasn't always great either." She stared into her coffee. "There was so much pressure to be what they wanted. Every time I showed interest in something serious, like when I wanted to study biology, they'd redirect me towards something they thought was more suitable. Fashion, art, things they saw as appropriate for someone like me." "Someone like you," I repeated. "Someone not very smart." Her voice was barely audible. They never said it directly, but the message was clear. Emma isn't academic like Morgan. Emma needs to find something that plays to her strengths. But they never let me discover what those strengths might be. This was a perspective I had never considered, that Emma might have been just as constrained by our parents' expectations as I was, just in a different way. They didn't believe in me either, Morgan. They just hid it better. Over the next hour, Emma revealed a side of herself I'd never seen. She had wanted to apply to science programs in college, but was steered toward fashion and communications because our parents didn't think she could handle anything more demanding. When she struggled academically, instead of encouraging her to work harder, they lowered their expectations further. "I'm not saying it was as bad as what they did to you," she clarified. "I got everything handed to me while you had to fight for every opportunity, but in their own way, they limited me too." Our conversation was interrupted by a call from our grandfather, asking if we could meet him for lunch. We found him waiting, at a restaurant near his hotel, his face grave. "I've been thinking about what happened at dinner," he said once we were seated. "There's more to this story than you girls know." He explained that favoritism had run through our family for generations. Our mother had been the neglected child in her family while her brother was favoured. Our father had experienced similar treatment, with his sister receiving most of their parents' attention and resources. "It's a pattern," he explained. "Your parents each unconsciously recreated what they knew, Diana by favouring Emma since she herself was overlooked, and Richard by going along with it since that's what he saw in his own home." "That explains it but doesn't excuse it," I said firmly. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "I should have intervened years ago. I saw what was happening but told myself it wasn't my place." The following week brought separate meetings with each of my parents. My father requested to see me first, suggesting we meet at a park where we used to walk when I was very young. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said as we sat on a bench overlooking a pond, "about the kind of father I've been, especially to you." He admitted that many of the financial decisions had been driven by my mother, but he had been equally complicit by going along with them. I told myself it was because Emma needed more support, but the truth is... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "The truth is you reminded me too much of my sister, the one who got everything right, who made everything look easy. I resented her my whole life, and somehow that affected how I saw you." It was a painful confession, revealing how deeply family patterns can run and how unconsciously we can perpetuate them. My meeting with my mother was more difficult. We met at a restaurant of her choosing, neutral territory. She arrived dressed impeccably as always, but the confident facade cracked as soon as we began talking about the dinner revelations. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she began, her voice unsteady. "What we did with your college fund and inheritance was wrong. Legally and morally wrong." I waited, sensing there was more. But I need you to understand something about me, Morgan. When you were born, you were so much like my brother, naturally gifted, quick to learn, everyone's favourite. He got all the opportunities, all the praise, while I was told I wasn't smart enough for college. Her eyes filled with tears. When I looked at you, I saw all the potential I was told I didn't have. And instead of nurturing that in you, She couldn't finish the sentence. You resented it, I completed for her. You punished me for reminding you of your own lost opportunities. She nodded, unable to speak. That's incredibly sad, Mum, for both of us. Our conversation continued, painful but necessary. Unlike my father, she was less willing to take full responsibility, still justifying some of their actions as doing what they thought best for both girls. She wasn't ready to fully acknowledge the damage they had caused, and I wasn't sure she ever would be. News of our family drama spread to extended relatives, creating rifts as people took sides. My father's sister called to tell me she'd suspected the favoritism for years but felt powerless to intervene. My mother's brother, the favoured child in their family, expressed shock and claimed he'd had no idea his sister was capable of such behaviour. Through it all, I maintained my focus on my upcoming job at Goldman Sachs, on building my new life, and on the unexpected relationship developing with Emma. The sister I had resented for years was becoming someone I might actually want in my life, not as the spoiled princess our parents had created, but as a young woman trying to discover who she really was beyond their limited expectations. The exposure had been necessary, bringing hidden truths to light. But I was beginning to understand that reconciliation would be a much longer, more complex journey, one that might not be possible with all members of my family. 6 months after graduation, my life had transformed completely. I was thriving in my position at Goldman Sachs, having already distinguished myself by bringing in 2 new significant clients. My apartment in Manhattan, which I could comfortably afford without any parental support, had become a sanctuary, decorated exactly as I wanted with no one to question my choices. The most profound changes, however, were in my family relationships. I had established clear boundaries with my parents, limited contact, on my terms, with explicit expectations for how I would be treated. My father had been more receptive to these boundaries than my mother, calling once a week for brief, somewhat awkward conversations that nevertheless represented more honest communication than we'd had in years. I'm proud of you, Morgan, he said during one such call. I should have said that more when you were growing up. My mother's journey toward accountability moved more slowly. She still occasionally slipped into old patterns, minimizing my accomplishments, centering conversations on Emma, making passive-aggressive comments about my need to prove something. Each time, I would calmly end the call or visit, reinforcing that I would no longer tolerate being diminished. The most surprising development was Emma's transformation. After our post-dinner conversation, she had made dramatic changes in her life. She moved out of the expensive Manhattan apartment our parents had been paying for, found a modest place in Brooklyn with roommates, and secured an entry-level position at a publishing house. It doesn't pay much, she told me during one of our now regular sister dinners. But it's mine. I earned it. The pride in her voice was something I'd never heard before, the satisfaction of achievement rather than entitlement. When I asked what had prompted such significant changes, her answer was simple: you. Seeing what you accomplished on your own made me realize I had no idea what I was capable of because I'd never really tried. Emma and I were building a relationship that had never been possible when we were trapped in the roles our parents had assigned us, golden child and scapegoat. Without those labels, we were discovering we actually liked each other. She was funnier than I'd realized, with a quick wit that had been obscured by her princess persona. I was more relaxed than she'd known, the defensive overachiever giving way to someone more balanced now that I had nothing to prove. In a move that surprised even me, I established a college fund for any future children Emma might have, as well as any I might have myself. To break the cycle, I explained when I told her about it. No one in our family will ever again be denied educational opportunities because of favoritism or financial manipulation. My relationship with the Andersons continued to flourish. They had become the mentors and parental figures I'd always needed, providing guidance without conditions and support without strings. When Caroline Anderson was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 months after my graduation, I found myself in the unexpected position of supporting her through treatment, driving her to appointments, researching clinical trials, simply sitting with her during chemotherapy sessions. "You know," she said during one such session, "we never had children of our own. Meeting you, mentoring you, it's been one of the greatest joys of our lives." I began mentoring young women from backgrounds similar to mine, academically gifted but lacking financial resources or family support. I shared my story selectively, emphasizing not the betrayal but the resilience, the strategies I had developed to overcome obstacles rather than the pain those obstacles had caused. The true test of our new family dynamic came at my grandparents' 50th anniversary celebration, the first time all of us would be together since the graduation dinner revelation. My grandmother had insisted on having all her girls there, refusing to take sides in what she called water under the bridge now. The event was held at an upscale country club, with extended family from both sides in attendance. I arrived early to help with arrangements, Emma joining me shortly after. We were setting up photo displays when our parents arrived, my mother tense, my father attempting to appear casual. "You look well," my mother said, her eyes taking in my confident posture, my tailored dress, the subtle indicators of my financial success. "Thank you," I replied simply. "So do you." The celebration proceeded with superficial pleasantries, everyone on their best behaviour for my grandparents' sake. But beneath the civility, new patterns were emerging. My mother no longer dominated conversations or steered attention toward Emma. My father asked thoughtful questions about my work, genuinely listening to my answers. Emma spoke confidently about her new job, no longer playing the helpless princess role. During the toast to my grandparents, my grandfather added an unexpected coda. "I'm also raising a glass to my granddaughters, Morgan and Emma. 2 remarkable young women finding their own paths. Nothing makes me prouder than seeing that." Later, as the party was winding down, my mother found me alone on the terrace. She seemed to struggle with what she wanted to say, finally settling on, "I may never be the mother you deserved, but I'm trying to be better than I was." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, and perhaps that was a starting point. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past few years. The pain of family betrayal had led me to discover strengths I might never have known I possessed. The necessity of independence had forced me to build a life entirely on my terms. The need to prove my worth had driven me to achievements that now formed the foundation of my success. I had wanted revenge, to see my parents' faces when they realised what they had discounted, what they had lost. I had achieved that moment of reckoning. But what surprised me most was how hollow victory felt compared to the peace that came with acceptance. Not acceptance of their treatment, but acceptance that I could not change the past or make them into the parents I had deserved. True freedom had come not from revenge but from financial independence, from building a support system of people who valued me, and from releasing the need for validation from those who had proven incapable of providing it. Family is still family. My grandfather had been right about that. But I had learned that family relationships can be redefined, restructured, limited or expanded according to how healthy they are. Some bonds had been strengthened through this process, others had been revealed as too damaged to fully repair. I was at peace with both outcomes. If you've ever had to redefine your relationship with family after betrayal or favoritism, you know this journey isn't easy or quick. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, and even more courage to set boundaries, without letting bitterness consume you. Has anyone in your family ever made you feel less than, or favoured a sibling over you? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more authentic family stories that show the complicated, messy reality of family dynamics. Like this video if you believe that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about getting even, but about building a life so good that past injustices lose their power over you. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your worth isn't determined by how your family sees you, but by how you see yourself.